Buddham saranang gacchami. I take refuge in the Buddha. Dhammam saranang gacchami. I take refuge in the Dharma. Sangham saranang gacchami. I take refuge in the Sangha. So, hello everyone, and welcome to Intro to Buddhism and Meditation. My name is Travis. I'll be filling in for Jeff today. So I enjoyed what we did on Saturday. So if you'd like, there's a chat box either right over here, depending on what you're using, either right over here or at the bottom somewhere, the live chat. And if you'd like to just type in one word, how you're feeling today, what you've been sitting with today or what you're sitting with in this moment. It's always good to stop for a minute, check in with how we're feeling, to really take a look at it. And it's good to notice how we feel before a meditation versus afterwards. So Bill shared that he's grateful. Wonderful. It's good to have you. Daniel is feeling content. Rose is happy. Jessica is impatient. Hopefully not because I started a little late, but I'm sorry if that's what made you impatient. Matthew is calm. Roberto's excited. Okay. So, like I mentioned, it's always good to check in with how you're feeling. And it can be good within the meditation to take some of the time of the meditation to check in with how you're feeling and to see if there's anything else beneath that feeling, or if that feeling is being used to mask something else. That can always be an interesting insight into how our mind works when we can notice our masking strategies or our coping mechanisms like that. So I invite you to explore that during the meditation. With that, we'll get started with the meditation. So a few things with posture. If you're sitting in a chair, helpful to have feet flat on the ground. If it's a comfortable chair, maybe not fully utilizing the backrest, so it's easier to stay awake. Tongue can be pressed up against the roof of the mouth and gently against the back of the teeth. Prevents the buildup of saliva, which can become distracting. It's helpful to imagine a string pulling the crown of the head up. I like to bring the shoulders up and back and then relax down into a really sturdy posture. If you're sitting on a cushion, that means you have a cushion at home and most likely you know how to sit. Main thing with that is just making sure your knees are below your hips, creating kind of a structural tripod. So with that, we'll get started. In terms of the method that we'll be using today, we'll be focusing on the breath, but we'll be working the breath throughout the entire body. So I might give I might give instructions like breathing in through the ears or breathing in through the eyes. And that's just kind of a conceptual exercise to spread our awareness through the body and spread kind of that sensation of breathing through the body to really relax into the moment, to notice our patterns of tension and be able to dissolve them away. So it might be kind of hard to intentionally dissolve tension in the center of the head. But with this breathing in through the eyes and the ears, you can kind of use this perception to tell the body to relax in places where you can't, where it's not as simple as just dropping the shoulders or unclenching the jaw or softening the forehead, all of which are also an important part of a meditation posture. So with that, we'll get started. Closing the eyes and taking 3 deep breaths slowly. Noticing if deep breathing feels good. And if it does, you can keep on breathing in this way. If it doesn't, you can switch things up. Maybe even deeper still, or more shallow, heavier or lighter. Long in and out short, or in short and out long. Just noticing what feels best for the body in this moment. And once you've found a rhythm and texture of breath that does feel good, you can settle into it, soften into it, maintaining awareness of this breathing, but relaxing the forehead and the shoulders, unclenching the jaw. And as you remain here, aware of the in and the out breath, question what perception you hold of breath and awareness. Do you perceive them as two separate things? What would happen if you held the perception that breath and awareness were one thing? Just test that out. Without awareness, you wouldn't notice the breath. Without the breath, awareness would die away. So they can be thought of as one thing, this breath awareness. Anytime that you've noticed that the mind has wandered, you can gently release the distraction. Relax the forehead and the shoulders, and return to this breath awareness. This time aware not only of the in-breath and the out-breath, but the in-between breath as well, the space between each breath. Just notice how that breath feels. You can gently guide this breath awareness down to the base of the spine. As you breathe in, you can allow breath awareness to flow up the spine, into the head. With the in-between breath, you can allow awareness to radiate out through the head. On the out breath, you can draw awareness back down through the spine to the tailbone. And on the in-between breath, you can radiate out from the tailbone. Just maintaining this perception through the in, the between, and the out breath. And if you encounter any tension or tightness while you're doing this, you can think of the breath flowing through it, dissolving it away. The breath was there first, the tension came later. You can allow this breath awareness to expand out from the spine, to gradually fill the entire body, flowing down the arms and out the hands, relaxing tension. Flowing down the front of the body, relaxing the chest and stomach. Flowing down the legs and out the feet. Just spreading this awareness out evenly to fill the entire body. To fill the head as well. Working the breath through the body to create a sense of ease, just like working water through flour to create dough. A good dough is one where water is evenly suffused throughout all the flour. And a good mind state is one, a good abiding is one that breath is evenly suffused throughout the body. Awareness is evenly suffused throughout the body. Once again, taking 3 deep breaths slowly. Gradually opening the eyes and stretching if necessary. As always, what's most important with the practice of meditation is to recognize how you feel now, after, and to know that whatever you're sitting with, any racing mind, busy mind, or any calm or peacefulness has nothing to do with anything that I said, nothing to do with how we sit or hold our hands, nothing to do with Buddha statues or anything else for that matter. It has everything to do with your own mind and your own mind's reaction to external conditions. This is what the Buddha called pratitya samuppada, or dependent origination. It was the basis of the Buddha's awakening. And basically what this means for each of us in our everyday lives is all day long things happen and we react. More stuff happens, more reactions. That's it. So the practice of meditation is learning how to be with something differently, still, from a place of ease within. So I do have somewhat of a topic planned for tonight, but I'd like to address one other thing first. In the beginning, when I did my chanting and we took refuge in the Triple Gem, those of you who sat with me before may have noticed that it's a different chant than I normally do. I normally do the Namo Tassa Bhagavato Arahato Samma Sambuddhassa 3 times, which is a passage of homage to the Buddha. But what was interesting, and I don't know if it's just the habitual tendency because this is Intro to Buddhism and Meditation, and normally we take refuge in the Triple Gem during this class, but when I opened my mouth to start my chant, the chant that came out was Buddham Saranam Gacchami, which is the translation of I take refuge in the Buddha. So I just went with it, but I think that it fits. But it's just an interesting example of this habitual tendency, this becoming, that the mind is already primed and inclined towards certain things based on our habits and our tendencies. So I just thought that was interesting. So every once in a while with these classes, I like to challenge myself a bit outside my comfort zone. Not always, because I don't want to always be a mess, but on occasion, I'll challenge myself to be a little outside my comfort zone. The very fact of leading this class is outside my comfort zone. Leading any of the classes is a bit outside my comfort zone. But typically when I lead a class, I really enjoy the process of preparing for a class. Spending that morning, that day preparing. Typically when I'm asked to sub, there's a lot less notification than I normally have, like a week. I know that I'm going to lead Thursday. I normally have at least a few days. But typically when I'm subbing, that's either the morning of, or in this case, about 2 hours before we started. So I didn't get to prepare. So instead, I prepared in about half an hour before I turned the camera on. And I decided to focus on one of the Buddha's most nuanced and complicated teachings. Because I thought that would be fun for everyone. So the reason I basically said Jeff's spiel, at least as much of it as I could remember, is because today we'll be talking about Patitya Samupata, or dependent origination. More specifically, the 12 links of dependent origination. So dependent origination is this thing that the Buddha noticed, and it's basically when he was deep in meditation and he managed to calm the static of the mind enough to see kind of the mechanism behind how the mind functions. The way that the mind creates a sense of self, creates its interpretation of the world around us. And that's dependent origination. And the Buddha saw this lightning fast process in these 12 links of dependent origination, or dependent co-arising. And he noticed that each link was dependent on the previous link. And dependent origination starts with ignorance and ends in suffering, and then loops back around to ignorance again. So he noticed that by uprooting that very ignorance, he could uproot suffering. So I'll go through kind of the 12 links. And I may use, a certain friend of mine has been asking a while for me to talk about dependent origination. And I'm getting around to it now. I used to talk about it a lot, haven't recently. So I'll use throughout the process, I'll probably use talking about cookies, or thinking about wanting cookies, because this particular friend really enjoys cookies. So we'll go through it. So the first half of dependent origination is things that happen kind of pre-consciously. They're the way that the mind, or the subconscious mind, the Buddha never called it a subconscious mind, but it's the closest parallel. The way that the subconscious mind primes the conscious mind based on past tendencies. So with ignorance as a prerequisite condition comes fabrication. So ignorance means ignorant to the Four Noble Truths, that in life there's suffering. The cause of suffering is craving. It's possible to uproot our suffering, and the path to uproot the suffering is basically living a wholesome life through the Eightfold Path. So from ignorance, from not really being sure of what we're doing, not really knowing what we're doing, comes fabrication. Fabrication refers to kind of the way that we're breathing, our internal monologue to an extent, or our internal, not necessarily conscious monologue, but our internal preconceived notions. And that's why the Buddha places so much focus on breath meditation, because that's a way of getting to recognize what our preconceived notions are, getting to recognize the breath, becoming more familiar with how the way that we breathe influences the way that we think, things like that. And then from fabrication as a prerequisite condition comes sixth sense consciousness, or the sixth sense bases. And this doesn't mean the senses themselves, but because it's referring more to the form, the fact that we have eyes, ears, nose, tongue, body, and mind. And then from those 6 sense bases comes what the Buddha called name and form, or mentality and materiality. And that just means kind of the internal sense of the body and the mind, that it's possible to feel the body from within, that we have this sense of form, this sense of having a body. So you can see how drawn out this process is, that the sense of a body existing actually comes forth in this chain. And then building off of that, from name and form comes the 6 senses. So because we have the consciousness, a consciousness capable of interpreting the 6 senses, and then we have this form that has the receptors, then comes the 6 senses. And it's 6 senses in the sense that mind and thought are another sense, just like eyes and sight, or eyes and seeing. So mind and thought. And then from the 6 sense media, then comes contact. And contact refers to when, for the example of the cookies, maybe I could use smell, right? So we have the 6 senses. The smell of cookies makes contact with the nose. Nose consciousness arises. So the meeting of the 6th sense, the smell, and the consciousness creates contact. Those 3 coming together is contact. So it's basically whenever we have any external stimuli meet our senses and give rise to consciousness within that senses. Then from contact, we have a feeling tone. Before we have any kind of mental story about it, we have a feeling tone. And that's why we really try to get in touch with the body within the meditation practice, and with sensations in the body, because kind of feeling tone is the part of this of these links of dependent origination, the furthest back part that we can, without extended meditation practice, that we can notice pretty immediately. If we're aware of the body, we can notice when tension arises in the body in relation to something we're seeing or hearing or smelling, right? So these feeling tones arise. So nose smells cookie. Feeling tone arises. It's maybe a pleasant feeling with a bit of tension in it, right? So the body kind of tenses up, almost like it's trying to grip on to that scent. And then from the feeling tone comes craving. So after we've had this physical sensation and we've labeled it pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral, then we go on to craving, which is, I want that, I don't want that, I'm not sure. So then this craving arises. Smelling cookies, craving, I want those cookies. And then clinging arises after that. So from craving to clinging, the main difference is craving can be somewhat like tension in the body, and it's the drive to like want to go get cookies. But then clinging is when we start to feed off the idea of eating cookies, right? Like if we had the thought that we wanted cookies, and then we're like, oh, I should make some cookies. What kind of extras do I want to put in the cookies? Do I want chocolate chips? Do I want white chocolate? Do I want dark chocolate? Should I put fruit in it or nuts in it? And we start, instead of actually feeding on the cookie, we start feeding on the idea of having a cookie. And then we create more tension in the body. We create an expectation that's usually not fulfilled, because the pleasure itself can never be as good as the story we've created about how good the pleasure is. And then from clinging comes becoming. From consistently clinging, it creates, from consistently clinging, it starts to create grooves in the mind. So then next time we smell a cookie, we're quicker to go to, I want a cookie, than we were before. So that's becoming. Another term, becoming is bhavana, it's the Pali word. And another term for it is habitual tendency. So it's this habitual tendency to, because we've reinforced craving and a clinging over and over again, our mind's more naturally inclined to go to it. You know, after smelling cookies a few times and creating that story about how bad you want cookies, eventually you don't have to smell cookies anymore. And just the idea of a cookie comes to mind. And then we're driven by that. We start feeding on that idea. Then the next step is birth, birth of action. So after reinforcing this tendency that we want a cookie, finally comes birth of action. We get up to check the pantry to see if we have cookies, or we have the ingredients for cookies, or we have money to go buy cookies. So that's that drive to action. And then after birth comes aging, illness, death, and suffering. So the aging, illness, and death of the action, right? So it doesn't necessarily work with the image of cookies. I guess it can. So birth of action, we go and we get cookies. The cookies are satisfying for a second. And then the taste of the cookies starts to get old. We start to no longer enjoy the taste of the cookies because we've had like 10 cookies. Now it's starting to make us feel a little sick. And then eventually that desire for cookies dies off altogether. And then all we're left with is the guilt of having crushed an entire pack of Oreos. Not from personal experience. But so that's kind of aging, illness, death, and suffering. That's part of this process. And this dependent origination that the Buddha noticed applies not only to each mental moment, but he said it's the same process that drives rebirth, which I won't really get into rebirth, but I just mentioned that to kind of make more sense of why birth, aging, illness, death, and death are on the links of dependent origination. And then eventually death happens, and then you return back to ignorance. So this is the process that the mind uses to create itself, and it's a process that's completely autonomous. It's something where if we're able to slow down enough, if we're able to distance ourselves enough from mental processes and relax into the moment, these links of dependent origination, we can actually watch them arise on their own, age on their own, and die away on their own. You could actually watch the process of the mind insisting that it wants a cookie all the way up and down without ever actually feeding into the process. And when you can notice this, you notice how kind of impersonal a lot of our thoughts can be. And that can be maybe a little scary for some, but it can also be incredibly freeing. We are not our thoughts. Our thoughts are the results of past actions and habitual tendencies, but we're not our thoughts. We don't have to identify with our thoughts. We can just let them be there. You know, just because we have a bad thought doesn't mean we're a bad person. Just because we have a good thought doesn't necessarily mean we're a good person. Thoughts are just thoughts. And there's a lot of freedom in noticing that. And this whole process, it's something that with enough consistent time and practice, you can begin to notice these links of dependent origination, and you can eventually go all the way back to ignorance, trace it all the way back to ignorance. But it's important to notice kind of the structure that the mind operates with. How one small thing leads to the next small thing, and it eventually builds into suffering. So when we're more aware of this process, we can actually hijack this process. Instead of operating from ignorance and leading to suffering, we can operate from skillfulness and from discernment and lead away from suffering. So that's the 12 links of dependent origination. I talked a little longer than I normally would. If anyone has any questions about those links or about anything else in general, let me know in the chat box. I totally smell cookies now, Corey. I sit up here and lead, then people will assume that I have some kind of level of realization or anything like that. I guarantee you that after this video is over, I'm going to go find cookies because I just talked about cookies for 20 minutes and there's no way I'm not having a cookie. But I'm aware of it and I can be mindful while I eat the cookie. So Marisa asked, is this similar to when you've told us about how you're able to curb anger by first noticing the tension in your body? Definitely. That's a perfect example. I'll talk a little bit about that. So this process of the six senses having contact, this feeling tone, this tension arises in the body. So in that example, we see something that makes us angry. My example that I usually give was about when I was driving. So we see someone merge without a turn signal, right? Unpleasant sensation arises in the body. Tension arises in the body. Craving. I want people to use their turn signal. It's there for a reason, right? Or I want people to use their turn signal. Clinging. It's there for a reason. How could they be so stupid? They could cause an accident. I could get in an accident because of them. All of this, like, the clinging is all of this feeding on it and trying to justify why you had an unpleasant sensation and all of that. And then becoming the habitual tendency is you become quicker to anger while you're driving, right? So what I tried was, and don't try this if you're super new to meditation, but if you've been doing it for a little while, I'd suggest it. I was driving and I had about kind of understanding this chain of dependent origination and how, at least as far back as I can trace or as far back as I have any control over, which is physical sensation, that tension, is that with the arising of this comes the arising of that. That's how it's codependent origination or codependent arising. And with the subsiding of this comes the subsiding of that. So by subsiding, by putting an end to the feeling tone, then craving drops away, clinging drops away, habitual tendency drops away, and then the birth of action, which is screaming, "You're such an idiot," and probably some F-bombs and whatnot. Instead of all of that playing out, which it would if I allowed the chain to continue, I go back as far as I can on the chain, which is feeling tones, and notice where it's causing tension in the body. And for each of us, we have specific patterns of tension relating to different emotions, and it varies person to person. For me, anger, the pattern of anger starts in the shoulders and works its way down the arms. But that craving and that storyline doesn't occur until tension reaches the hands and clenches into a fist. When the fist is clenched, typically around the steering wheel, then anger arises. And then it's almost too late. It's a little late to do anything about it because then you're caught in the mind storm. But to get out of the mind, you can get back into the body. So since I noticed that the pattern of tension for anger for me starts in the shoulders, I kept about 10% of my attention on if my shoulders were stiff. That was about a 20-minute drive. And normally I would have, I don't necessarily shout that often, but I would have definitely gotten irritated or angry or passive-aggressive snarky comments. At least like 3 times in a 20-minute drive at least. But during that drive and in future drives, I didn't get angry. Anger never arose because the preconditions for anger were never met. My shoulders were bobbing the entire time for the whole 20 minutes, but anger didn't arise because I didn't let the pattern of tension play out. So yes, it is similar. It's based on kind of this understanding of dependent origination. Does anyone else have any questions? A question about when other people respond to us in fear. So Rose asked, what is the best thing to do in these situations when someone gets angry with us or fearful and sort of reacts? Okay, that's a fun one. The first thing to do is acknowledge that that person is suffering. That's the first thing I try to do because it takes me out of my own narrative and it prevents a sense of self-righteousness from arising to then I have to justify why I don't deserve to be talked to this way and why they're a bad person. So the very first thing is to acknowledge if someone is being mean to you or fearful, it's because they're suffering. It's because they're in so much pain that it's pouring over. It's spilling out of them onto others. So that's the first thing, to approach those kinds of situations with that perception in mind. They're the one that's in pain. The second thing to do in that type of situation, I would say the second thing to do is to just not react. But I know that's a little harder, easier said than done. So the second thing I would suggest, and this becomes easier with more consistent meditation practice, is to relax the forehead, relax the shoulders. When someone comes at you with anger or with fear, the first thing we do is get ready for battle. The body tenses up, ready for battle. So to, again, go back, use this dependent origination, trace it back to sensation, relax that, disengage combat mode. And then just kind of, if it's a situation that you're in danger, of course, separate yourself from the situation, remove yourself from the situation. If it's someone that you know well, in that sense, if it's someone that you know well, just be there with them. Try to keep your body relaxed. Oftentimes, if they're acting out like that, just let them vent if you can handle it. If you're not at a place where you can be still with someone else's suffering, then remove yourself from the situation. But otherwise, it can be really helpful. A definition of compassion is to be with someone in their suffering, but not to be their suffering. So oftentimes people think compassion is commiseration, but that's not the case. Compassion is being still in the midst of suffering, not being overwhelmed by it, but simply being there with someone who's suffering. And if it's within your power to help alleviate your suffering, their suffering, you do so. If it's not, then equanimity is necessary. The stepping back. So I hope that helps. Yeah. So, oh, and then you can offer them a cookie. I will go into the links a bit more on Thursday, because I'll probably continue this topic. It's a pretty dense topic, and it's considered one of the Buddha's most important teachings. So we'll probably go over it Thursday night at 7, because we're out of time right now. But we'll close with a transfer of merit and then a few announcements. So if comfortable, please join palms. May any merit gained from this meditation and discussion be dedicated to all those who suffer at this time. May all beings be healthy, joyful, and at ease. May we all be healthy, joyful, and at ease. Metta karuna muditau peka sangha teya cetasa chaturisam bharatva bharati samba buddharu bhavena samba dhammaru bhavena
Sabba sanharu bhavena sote hantu nirantaram.
So I'm going to try a few quick announcements before we head off. My name's Travis. I'm a Dharma bum. I'm not a teacher, guru, monk, or anything else, just a practitioner sharing my experience with the teachings, my perception of the teachings with others. This is the Dharma Bum Temple. We opened this crazy little place quite a few years back to be a bridge to introduce people to Buddhist practice. None of the people who lead here are monks, gurus, teachers, or anything else. Simply practitioners sharing their interpretations of the teachings. Everything that we offer here is free. It's not just free because there's a pandemic. Everything we offer is always free and always will be free. So that was the Buddha's intention, the teachings to be offered for free. We have people who lead classes pretty much almost every night of the week. Tuesday night, Wednesday night, and Thursday night. Jeff normally leads Tuesday night, Intro to Buddhism and Meditation. Alex leads Wednesday night, Loving Kindness Meditation. And then I was like, who leads Thursday? I lead Thursday's Dharma Bum Basics discussion circle. And then Jeff leads Intro to Buddhism and Meditation on Saturdays at 11. All our recovery stuff is online through Zoom, and also through Zoom, our afternoon meditation from noon to 1 every Tuesday is on Zoom as well with Natalie. It's always enjoyable. Come check it out if you have that time available, which you probably do. Morning meditations throughout the Monday through Friday through Zoom as well. 2 25-minute sits. All this information is available on the website. And if I never see you again, think good thoughts, speak good words, do good deeds. Thanks, everyone.